And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Three Pod. What episode are we on, Sarenth?
We are on episode 60, believe it or not.
Jesus.
Yes, he is apparently part of this conversation tonight.
Well, tonight for Three Pagans, on tap. A good friend of mine, Kevin O'Brien, graciously agreed to join us. If I don't cough and choke on allergies. I forgot to take my meds this morning, and it's been a nightmare all day.
Understood.
Kevin is a pastor with the ELCA. Please correct me if I say anything incorrectly.
Absolutely.
I've known you for all of a year now, something like that.
A little over, yeah.
Is it? Yeah, I guess it's a little over now at this point. We had talked theology and things a few times, and Kevin pesters me more about the book that I'm supposed to be writing than almost anyone else I know, which is hilarious. So yeah, he offered, and I was like, yeah, that actually would be a great idea. So, here we are.
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity. And the only reason I pester you about the book is I'm genuinely curious in everything that you have to say and everything that is coming together into it. Not because I am trying to get under your skin or anything.
No, I know. It's more funny than anything. One of the Discord groups I'm in has a Book Writers Anonymous where we all complain about the books that we have to write and how we're not making progress on them.
Or how we are. Occasionally we do updates about how we are making progress.
Yeah, no, that's true. That is true.
Okay, fine, Frere. We're just going to lay you down.
That sounds about right.
So for those who don't know, I got this from Maleck, and this is a representation of Frere.
Yes.
And it was standing up at one point, and it wants to lie down now, which is totally fair. It is that time of year for Frere.
Yeah.
Let's just put you right here.
That is actually one of my oldest representations.
That's fabulous. I appreciate that.
Anyway, before we get too into things, Sam, you want to lead us off with a prayer?
Sure do. Give me 5 seconds for station identification. Hey, I almost put that in my shot glass. Okay. Hail Loki, hail Othin, hail Dionysus. Oh, that's good stuff. Okay. Hail to our gods of hospitality. Hail to the guest greeters. Hail to the seat warmers. Hail to the hearth keepers. Hail to the holy ones who welcome. Hail to the holy ones who greet. Hail to the holy ones who provide safety and protection under gabled roofs, under hut and hall. Hail to the blessed ones who bring wisdom at the fireside. Hail to the generous ones who share the last crust of bread. Hail to the blessed ones who know how to sate want and thirst. Hail to the blessed ones who bring rest to the weary and comfort to all who are pained. Hail to the blessed ones, the ancestors who kept the home, who kept good the home and the hearth, and well were hosts, and well were guests. Hail to our Vetir, the spirits who show us the way to live well on this land, wherever we are, from our listeners, our watchers, our friends and family. Hail to all the blessed ones who teach us how to live harmoniously. Hail to the blessed ones who teach us how to live when we want to be inharmonious. Hail to the blessed ones who teach us to make peace. Hail to the holy ones who teach us to open our homes and our hearts. Hail to the blessed ones who teach us grace and giving. Hail to the blessed ones who teach us wealth in wisdom gathered at the table and the fire and the bed. Vestual.
Cheers.
Cheers. Skal.
What was I going to say? I had a thought. It's gone. Kevin, do you want to tell us a little bit about what being a pastor in the ELCA is like?
What being a pastor in the ELCA is like? Cats. Lots of them.
Oh, see, when you said cats, I thought the musical.
Oh, yeah, sometimes it feels like it. No, so being a pastor, what the fundamentals of my position and our understanding of the priesthood within the ELCA is that we are priests, the priesthood of all believers. So I have no special connection to our faith that any of my parishioners don't have. I have no more direct connection to God than any of them. However, what I do have is education and skills. And so I am to be a first among citizens within the congregational life. What that means more fundamentally is that I am teacher, I am leader, but I am not savior. I am not someone who's coming to tell them who they need to be. I am kind of the bridge that catalyzes what is already happening there, at least ideally. But what you will find in everywhere is people don't normally appreciate that, or at least some don't. And so I'm also the fire starter and the fire putter outer and all sorts of things. But principally, though, I am a person who is specially trained and called. We believe in the twofold call, which is a call from God and a call from the church. Both of those need to be in the individual to be sent to a congregation to then say to that congregation, who are you? How is God here? And what can I do to help?
Interesting. For those of us who don't know, what does ELCA stand for?
Yes, absolutely. Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.
Okay. So I know there's two really big synods that I know of within the Lutheran religion. Is this an offshoot or is this part of one of these synods?
So the word synod gets a little confusing within the Lutheran realm because different Lutherans use it differently.
Understood.
So our denomination, the ELCA, is the largest Lutheran body in the country, in the
Okay.
US. The other ones you may hear about are the Missouri Synod. See, now we're using synod differently.
Right.
The Wisconsin Synod. There is the North American Lutheran Church, the NALC, which was an offshoot of us. And there's Free Lutherans. And after that, you get into much smaller groups. But I use synod to denote that I am part of the Northwest Lower Michigan Synod of the ELCA. So it's a geographic region that's run by a bishop and a central office that all congregations within this geography report to.
Just to make things extra clear.
Exactly. And the reason for that confusion is the ELCA was formed in 1988, so it's relatively new, and it was formed after some of the colonial Lutherans, they merged together, and then those ones got with other ones, and they merged together, and there's been this just branching of mergers coming together, and the last large one was that oh goodness, I'm gonna forget something. The American Lutheran Church and the Lutheran Church of America, which were two different churches, and the American Evangelical Lutheran Church in 1988 combined to be the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. That is different.
There is nothing confusing about that.
Oh, absolutely.
Perfectly straightforward.
And the best part of that is the ALC and the LCA churches had very different identities and power structures.
Oh,
and
fabulous.
And because people don't like making hard decisions, this is a personal belief of mine. Instead of like creating something new in 1988, they just took them and smashed them together. And so we have pieces of all of them. And so nothing works well.
It's the 80s.
It's and you know what? At the time, one of the large corporations that ruled America was IBM.
Right.
IBM is still very large, but IBM in the 80s and then going into the 90s was massive. And so they took the corporate model of IBM and they applied it to the church structure.
Oh,
And so
God.
there's a lot of like individual departments that are isolated from each other, and there's a lot of redundancies and things that do not work well. So one of the struggles the ELCA is going through right now is we have a commission called a Commission for a Renewed Lutheran Church that is actually looking at the structural inefficiencies. And we have 65 synods across the United States. Some of them, there are 8 in Pennsylvania alone, and then one of them is the entire Southeast United States.
Oh my.
And that's because of density of Lutherans. Pennsylvania is the home of American Lutheranism after the Germans came over and settled in Pennsylvania.
Okay, that tracks.
Whereas the Southeast, not very many Lutherans, a lot of Baptists. So
yeah,
gotcha.
So they're looking at that stuff, but that's a little crash course into it, and that's why it's confusing for my people, right? My congregation. It's confusing for me, and I got a degree in it. So at the end of the day, though, we throw up our hands and say, hey, the structures are going to be structures, and we're going to do our best to reform them, to make them as best at achieving our goal of serving God as possible. But they're not going to really affect where I am in Freeland, Michigan, right? We're going to do our best to do God's work in our one foot after another, and all the stuff in the ALC-LCA, what we call things, synods, presidents, we won't let that stop us. At least that's what I think.
That's a really, I think, practical, at least practical philosophical approach to have to,
right,
the chaos that is all power structures, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, especially when you're talking about an institution that's been around in various forms since the 1800s. So
right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about a very long-lived religious tradition having to go through what we hear a lot about in mainstream religious beat media discourse is schisms. We don't hear as much about the mergers. So
right.
This is really a fascinating thing for me because I come out of the Catholic Church originally, became a heathen when I was 18. And so I'm used to those power structures and all the controversies that come when a new pope's elected or when disagreements over how to implement Vatican II come in. Because, we still have the last vestiges of the generation of Vatican I slowly dying off. And then people who've only known Vatican II. And so there's that generational divide, but there's not as many of these structural issues because the Catholic Church is the way it has been for a while. But I find it really neat because this is a very different critter than implementing top-down edicts.
Yeah, and one of the problems that we have that I think, not that I know anything, but that I think is really at the core of some of our struggles as we are reinterpreting what it means to be Christian in the 21st century, and specifically Lutheran Christian, we don't have top-down power.
Right.
And that's out of great fear of top-down abuse, which is real. And it happens.
Absolutely. I mean,
and endemic in the church, especially, but in other institutions as well. But because of that, something like, I don't know, a global pandemic happens, and the bishop doesn't even have the power to tell a congregation whether worshiping in a high infected area is a good thing to do or not. The bishop couldn't say that. Every church had to make that decision for themselves, which led to some churches, frankly, making terrible decisions because it almost felt like uh, I can't think of the word, it's escaping me. Like leadership wasn't there.
Right.
And so when we look at other very poignant modern issues like human sexuality, like war and justice, like Israel and Palestine, these are things that our congregations care about. These are things that our people are, especially human sexuality and things like racism and uh, uh, goodness, other things that people are living with.
Right.
People want to know what the church believes, and the best answer often is, well, we kind of think this, but what do you think? Which is good sometimes, but sometimes it's not. And I struggle because I can't even tell people whether something that is clearly racist is sinful or not. And that's really, really obnoxious.
Sorry.
That's
That's hard.
That is very hard. That is very frustrating. Like, not to speak for you because I'm not in your shoes, but that would drive me insane.
Well, and the answer is I just do it anyway. And seriously, now I wasn't at this church during the pandemic. I was in Pennsylvania. I was in Central PA, and we had a very rural, very conservative congregation, small mountain church. The booming, the county seat, which was the town, had a booming 1,400 people in it.
Woo!
Yeah, just and so when COVID happened, the thing I heard most right away was, it'll never touch us. That's a big city problem. Disease is a big city problem. It won't, we're so rural, how could we ever get it? Well, then we got it, right? And I stood up in front of them and said, some of you will disagree with me, but by golly, I'm the pastor. And there are very few times, I tell people this all the time, that I have a big red button that says I'm the pastor, and I don't like pressing it, but I will press it. And I pressed it and I said, in order to be good humans, we cannot worship in person. It is a risk to everyone. It is a risk to our, especially our immunocompromised. Let's be frank, the congregation was a little older, people who are a higher risk. It is irresponsible for us to do this. Even if you choose to do it, that's not the point. And so we stopped worshiping in person for a time. And I got feedback.
Some heat, I'm sure.
Not as much as you would think, actually. It took some time, but they were very appreciative. And I'm a musician. One of the ways that I connect to my faith is through song, through singing. And we couldn't sing for over a year. And it broke my heart because our congregation, our actual worshiping space, sanctuary, is tiny. Tiny. You put 60 people in there and you were shoulder to shoulder the whole place. And so the idea of 6 foot distance and things like that, there was no possible way we could responsibly sing at all for well over a year. Because it was too risky, it was too high risk, and it broke my heart, but it was the right thing to do. And so when we're talking about these top-down decisions, it does happen because you're right. I could not live if I didn't have some authority to do things. But also that authority is earned. And I do like that. The people trusted me. And we did it, and we weathered it actually better than most of the local congregations, both in health. We had very few infections, including me. I got it twice. Once from my then 3-year-old, but how do you tell a 3-year-old to social distance and quarantine?
It's hard. I understand because I had to do the same thing during. I was in a trailer for the better part of a year, and I had I think she was 2 or 3 at the time, so I understand.
Yeah, it's tough, but we got through it the best we could, and it was the right thing to do. And so if that's the authority that I get placed on me by the church, by my congregation, to help protect people, that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
Regardless of if the higher ups say, well, you can't really tell people that. Yes, I can.
Yeah, after a certain point, like somebody has to say this isn't okay. This needs to stop for a while.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, and that's there is, I think, a religious component to it, because there's no way to avoid that. You're dealing with a church, but a lot of that is simply administrative power, right? You said we're still going to meet. I can't mediate your relationship with God,
right?
But we're not going to meet in person because that's dangerous.
Right. And it really challenged the church insofar as questions like, what does community mean? Because we had only identified community as physical presence, because we had never had a reason to not define it as physical presence. And suddenly we're doing online worship. And thank goodness we have the technology to do that, so we were able to still connect with each other in faith. But that brought up a whole host of theological questions. Some of which are still unresolved and probably will be for some time.
Really quick, Emily says that's an interesting challenge. I think a lot of pagan groups also struggle with how much power to give to the leadership. Having been the priest of a church, I can say that it's a live football and no one's got it resolved. Even for those who have formalized priesthoods, it's always a question of how much power do you wield? How much power do you, there's also the question of is this hard power, which is wired into the system of how you organize the political structure of your church or temple or what have you. And then there's the soft power. And I think that because of how paganism works, we struggle more with the soft power aspects because we have so few institutional structures. And the institutional structures we do have struggle with how much authority they're willing to give to experts, which is useful in the sense of not having everybody gather in Jim Jones's locker, but also good in the sense of independent thought. But it's a pretty rough road to hoe when it's okay, it's decision-making time and we don't know where to go or how to get there, and there's no structure for it. And I come out of the Robert Rules of Order or organizing model from nonprofit work.
We use Robert Rules, and I love it, and I hate it, and it is glorious.
Yep. It's an excellent apparatus until it makes itself grind to a halt. I mean, this is true of consensus building, because I was part of Occupy Wall Street in the local area where I'm at. And you saw really quick in flesh and blood the real limitations of a consensus system. So every system's got their weaknesses, and I'm sure we can get more into that. I also wanted to highlight this other point from Jason. I mean, someone eventually needs to be the adult in the room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes you want to talk about the priesthood. Sometimes it feels like that. I am the adult in a room full of children. And I love my people, and they are glorious. And most of them are not like this, but sometimes, the maturity of faith, the maturity of understanding what it means to be human in a world where we believe in something beyond the physical realm, is either new to people or people have never had a challenge. That's a big one I come across, is people who are lifelong Christians, but their faith has been coddled so much in a society that coddles Christians that the moment I come in and I do not coddle, it can send them reeling, and it can really feel like, really, this is pretty basic stuff to question and to wrestle with this, but they've never had to before.
I'm laughing partly because I know exactly what you're talking about, because I've had this exact issue with pagans and heathens.
Right.
But I also am kind of laughing because there's a very favorite quote from an old friend of mine who said, everybody wants to be their own priest until they need one.
Oh, interesting. I like that.
Go ahead, Maleck. I can see the wheels turning.
So I got a couple of thoughts. One of them being, there's also an old saying, I believe in Mongolia, which is even the sharpest knife can't carve its own handle, which ties back into the yeah, everyone wants to be their own priest until they need one. Well, yeah, it's kind of both, though, right? Sometimes you do need that outside help, right? It's real hard to do surgery on yourself, or be your own therapist, right? Like that's pretty rough, and not advised. And also, I had a thought beyond that. Damn it, it's gone. Keep going. I'm gonna try and find it. Yeah, exactly.
No problems. I think that one of the things that I also hear as you're talking about your experiences being a pastor is when somebody comes to you with a question of discernment, and this is an active football in a lot of our spheres too, to what degree do you give your opinion versus here are the breadcrumbs for how I got to my position? Like one of the things that we talk about quite a lot on this show and also on Around Grandfather Fire is how we arrive to periods of discernment. Is this a God? Is this a spirit? Is this your own internal monologue track? Something you want to hear? Which these are active questions from when I was a Catholic as well. Like, how do you know if this is God or Christ or the Virgin Mary telling you to do something, or is this what you want to do already? And it just happens to coincide with this thing you're feeling.
Right.
So what I'm hearing is that like your position as a pastor is a really interesting crossroads of administration and spiritual counseling.
Yes, absolutely. And there is always a fine line, and I don't always walk it well, between encouraging them to come to their own discernment, their own conclusions, and then offering my personal insight, which comes from a place of wisdom and faith, or at least I hope it does. And so
you're called to be Christ-like. If you were Christ, this would the organization of the ELCA wouldn't be a big an issue, would
it? Yeah, and I had this conversation with a young person today who's in discernment, and every question of discernment, it's we're talking about football a little bit. You can't just go out on the field and start playing at your best. You got to prepare for it. You got to work the muscles. You got to do the drills. You got to learn the plays, the positions. And believe me, I'm the last person who expected to use a sports analogy in this conversation. But so discernment is the same way. You don't just do discernment willy-nilly. You have to prepare yourself spiritually for it. It is a lifelong process. You are constantly training and sharpening, and you do that not just by yourself, but by community to help weed out those human weaknesses that we have. We want power. Power is very attractive to the human being, right? Power is a very powerful tool. It's a great tool, and it can be wonderful, and it can destroy you, and it can destroy everyone around you. So we build ourselves in community.
Yep.
So that my brother, my sister, my friend can come up to me and say, what you are seeking right now is not the person I know you to be. It is not the faith that I have heard you confess. What's going on? And that accountability is also part of the discernment process. So that when the question comes, where is God in this moment? The question has been there for years, and I have just been preparing to ask it and to answer it.
That's a very, very practical approach. I'm not shocked this is a Lutheran approach. I've known a number of Lutherans over my lifetime. It's a very practical way of doing things, and I appreciate that. One of the things that also comes to mind as you're going through this guiding process is a very interesting similarity, I think, that we have in heathen circles and in animist and polytheist circles more broadly, where you've got some people that are always going to go for the iron club. They're not going to velvet their hand. They're all iron gauntlet all the time. Then you got some people who are velvet glove all the way. There is no iron here. And what I'm hearing in the Lutheran approach, which is very similar to my heathen approach, is there is iron under here. I'm going to touch you with the velvet first. But if you need the iron, I reserve the right to use it.
I almost think about like placing the weight of the iron on them. Like, understand this is here. I'm not going to use it because I believe in grace and I believe in you coming to your own understanding, but it is here and it will fall. Because there are lines we inevitably have to draw of this is not who we are.
Right.
And this is who we are. And if we're going to be in relationship, especially as siblings in faith, you need to be on the same side as me.
So to that point, when you love people to bits and pieces and want to turn them into bits and pieces.
Amen. Like, absolutely.
That is a classic Maleck.
Yeah. Well, and that dives directly into kind of one of the topics that I told Kevin to possibly prepare for, which was the problem of evil and sin and redemption theology.
Theodicy is so good.
So, a little short story. I went to a public school. I went to Oakland University here in Michigan. And in order to, I have a degree in philosophy. And in order to graduate with a philosophy honors, you had to go through a dissertation defense.
Okay.
And obviously not as rigorous as an advanced degree, but we still had to do it. And I wrote on theodicy at a public institution as my dissertation defense on the pragmatic belief of the existence of God, using a pragmatic model, couching that within what's called a coherentism theory of epistemology. And I can dig into that if you want, but we'll be here all night.
Maybe in the after party, because this sounds
and how that leads to, and the conclusion you draw from that is the world that God exists, or frankly, gods exist, though I wasn't asking that question at that time, and the world where there are no gods could potentially look identical. Because if gods are powerful enough, they can hide their presence from humanity. And so you will never be able to discern between a reality where gods are hiding versus a reality where gods are absent. Therefore, any logical attempt to prove or disprove their existence is already in fallacious territory. And because of that, and that's where the coherentism comes in, we get into, but you can make it less likely. And that's where I went into theodicy. And what do we do with theodicy if we believe God is good, but the world has evil in it? We witness it. It's all around us. How could God let that happen?
Yeah. That's really fascinating. So being educated as a scientist, which I am, I have a degree in biology. For people who don't know, I have a degree in biology. A lot of scientists are, especially young scientists, are very edgy atheists. Shocking.
Very edgy. Kind of like pizza cutters. All edge, no points.
I once had a kid in class say that there is no such thing as a soul, and he could prove it, and then he went on a rant about, well, you know, we have no evidence of it, therefore it's not real. And I was like, that's not what that means.
That's a fallacy. It's argument of ignorance.
Yeah, quite literally. That's quite literally fallacious. Anyway,
my degree's in psychology with a minor in religious studies, so I want to hear the coherency bit later.
For sure. I was deeply, I've always been deeply religious, but I was deeply Christian while I was in college, mostly. That's a complicated topic. Anyway, Lutheran, actually, or at least I was raised that way. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. The not well thought out and certainly not formalized, but the rough conclusion that I came to in defense of my own faith with dealing with these edgy atheists who are all, oh well, we can't prove it, therefore it's not real. And I'm like, well, aside from that being fallacious, is also like, no, you can, if we're assuming intelligence, which is the point of a divine being, I cannot see the wind, therefore the air is not real. Exactly. But the conclusion I came to is basically very, very similar to what you argued, right? Is the if intelligent beings are powerful, they can hide, right? I can hide from my dog, therefore God can hide from me, right? If I can't see him, he can hide from me. That's a thing. You know, and that was the, oh well, we haven't measured it, or we can't measure them, therefore they're not real. No, you just don't necessarily see their effects.
We cannot measure the emotion of love, but we certainly can see that love and similar emotions that can elicit chemical reactions in the body for good and for ill. We know that stress can kill you, therefore we know that the unseen can certainly have a material impact, even if we cannot visually see the root of anger or sadness or love.
Yeah, and there's no logic to something like love. Humans are biological engines, right? We are programmed for our own survival, for the survival of our seed, for the, I shouldn't have said seed, that's a weird way to put it, for our own personal protection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet we choose again and again to sacrifice our own well-being for the sake of someone else, for the sake of an idea, for the sake of loved ones. That biologically makes no sense, right? Why should I die for another? And it's because of things like love, like adoration, like faith. And this is what really can separate us and take us apart from, I don't want to say other animals, because I do think animals have a more rich experience than we probably give them credit for.
Not to be too vulgar, but like snakes have clitorises, we found out like a couple of years ago.
I've read that.
So if
The
snakes
more
can
you know.
experience pleasure,
Yep.
Yeah.
it opens up a whole new world of understanding and emotion. At least I would hope it would.
Yeah.
And so in a world where these unmeasurable things have considerable impact on who we are as a species, right? There's got to be more, right?
Yeah.
Or at least you can't tell me there's certainly not more, right?
Exactly.
We just heard what a solar wind sounds like from a probe this year.
Yep.
There is so much about the universe we don't know. And I think it's the humility. And I think this is useful for us not only when we're confronting edgy atheists, but when we're confronting true believers in our own ranks.
Yeah.
Like ourselves included, because like I certainly with certainty believe the gods are real. What I hold loosely is in what fashion and ways they're real, because I can't say that for certain without being wrong.
Yeah. Right.
That's a very shaky foundation to build your faith on anyway, because let's say there has to be a material reality for God to exist. And then you find out there's some sort of quantum woo thing for why we even can perceive time, which there probably is, but I don't know the math or the quantum theory, and I'm not going to try. But without getting too into a fallacy of appealing to authority through quantum theory, which way we decide to take this, like the long story short of it is that if I have enough humility that I can say, you know what, I don't know everything, and solipsism is a shit philosophy on which to build a life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
it might be right. I really hope not, because
that sounds like hell. You talk about separation from God. Oof.
Yeah.
I shut my eyes and nothing else exists. Neat. That doesn't sound like a really fun way to live.
It really doesn't.
And then, again, getting back to a little pragmatic, we might not know these things. These are philosophical, they're theological. But at a certain point, I choose to believe in
Yeah.
something,
I
and that
I
choice is important.
Sorry, it's a weak sauce theology argument, but I love Puddleglum's point to the witch, the green witch in the silver chair of the Chronicles of Narnia, where okay, for those who don't know, because I've been reading that shit since I was a very young child. There's a point where he talks to the witch, and she's explaining to Puddleglum and the two kids that are part of the story, there is no upper world. This is all stories you've been told. There is no sun, there is no moon, there is no stars. It is just the subterranean realm. That's all there is. And Puddleglum looks at her and says, you know what? This lamp here, it makes fire. And you know what? If the imagination that there is a ball of fire in the sky is so much more impressive than this little bit of fire you've got down here, well, I'm going to continue to believe that there is a sun and that there is a moon and that there are stars. And it should say something to you that my imagination can lick your world hollow.
Interesting.
Oh, the Puddleglum defense is absolute weak sauce as far as a religious argument goes, but it's really compelling emotionally.
Yeah,
absolutely. Just don't take it so far that you start convincing yourselves of false truths,
Right.
of things that are clearly measurable around you, like science.
Yeah.
Oh, you...
You know, I was having that thought actually today while I was at work of like, it's we're circling back to discernment, right? Of where do we draw the line, and how do we differentiate between things that are emotionally moving or that seem right logically? Because there are a lot of things there have been many scientific theories that made logical sense but did not hold out to be true, right? They were proven over time. And similarly, that is not, somebody's going to take that in a really anti-science way. That's not what the fuck I'm talking about. That's not some anti-vaxxer is going to get a hold of that sound bite and just run with it. I'm just like, no, that's not what I'm saying. As Emily says, cough, flat earthers cough.
We type at the same time again.
Yeah. Or like, you know, you can read a piece of fiction. Often I will read pieces of fiction and get the same chills that I get when I feel the presence of the divine. And they're not the same thing. They might be touching the same place, but they're not the same thing.
Absolutely.
What, Sarenth? What?
Nothing. My brain is firmly in the gutter, and I apologize for nothing. So the funny part, I think, about when you're talking about thinking or thinking about emotion, is thinking is an emotional process. And I think that people will often mistake this for being a cold, utterly rational in a detached way. And I don't know, besides, and I wouldn't even say psychopaths can do this, because psychopaths have a very particular makeup through which emotion is felt or experienced. The idea of emotionlessness in humanity is contrary to what I scientifically, intellectually, spiritually understand about how we work. And it doesn't make sense to me. Especially because I will talk with atheists, and occasionally you will eventually, if you listen long enough, if you have patience and grace enough, you will eventually get a ghost story, or I couldn't explain this phenomena. I can't talk about my atheist friends about this. What do you think? There is, you know, I've had this with Christians who were utterly convinced you shouldn't speak with the ancestors. You can't speak with the ancestors, but they just can't help but carry around this one keepsake from their grandfather. Okay, so what do you think about this? There's like, we hit this edge of where we're almost too damn clever for our own good. And actually, this is something that was picked up in the comments, where they were talking about the cats also see all, they're just opinionated about it. Oh, trust me, dogs are opinionated about all things too. Yeah, I don't think dogs are all observant. I think they actually make a decent analogy for humans.
Yeah.
They do. It's an amusing analogy. And Emily says, insight and understanding can come through many different pathways. I think there's value in utilizing multiple pathways, reading fiction, spiritual practice, and social interactions.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm getting to is like insight, understanding, and wisdom are different critters that you're trying for different things than you're trying to measure for a particular result when A chemical interacts with B chemical, or when you're trying to see if this is an ingrained behavioral response, when you're doing double-blind studies. There's different setups for different questions. And part of the problem with scientism is it puts itself in that place where you have to have faith that the scientific process knows all. The scientific process's main bug and feature is it knows jack shit.
Yep.
That is, as a scientist, scientism is the bane of my existence because it religifies science, and it's like, no, y'all, that's the opposite of what you're trying to do. Science doesn't tell us things. Science is a way of understanding the world. It's a thought process.
Yes.
It's a way of gathering and vetting information. That's what it is.
My ruler measures distance. It does not tell me how to relate to the ground.
Exactly.
Right.
My measuring tape measures my waist. It does not measure my uniqueness as a human being or my goodness as a person. It's literally just ticks on a piece of tape.
Yeah.
And just like we can expand that into more advanced stuff, if you read my genetic sequence, right, it will tell you a lot about me. It will tell you about my genetic makeup, about things I inherited from my parents. Thanks, Mom and Dad. But it will not tell you who I am. Right?
Correct.
It will not tell you my memory or my shared experience in living. That there's a completely separate part of reality that we get to experience, and it's beautiful and wonderful, and sometimes it's terrible and painful, but it is real. And we have to live using the tools of science. Science is incredibly useful, incredibly powerful. I have a more scientific mind. We have to use these tools, but we cannot believe that these tools are the answer to these deeper questions, because they're not. And going all the way back to theodicy, this is kind of where I was going with trying to prove God's existence. Is logic can only take you so far,
Right.
and at some point, and this is Soren Kierkegaard, the Dutch Reformed theologian, you got to take a leap of faith. And what that looks like is different for everyone. And I'm not going to pretend that my leap is better or more important than yours. I believe in what my faith is. That's why I'm a Christian. I believe in it. I'm a true believer in that. But we can still relate to one another of people who take different leaps, whether that is into atheism, which is its own leap of faith, or heathenry, or anything. We can relate to each other because we're human and we have taken that leap.
Right. To highlight some of the comments that have been made so far. Good to see you, Chris, by the way. Jason says the scientific method is for understanding a specific thing, not everything. If you took your ruler out for coffee, it might give you more insights. Sure, maybe. Knowing the right and appropriate tool for the job or question is key. That's
Absolutely.
Right. And genetics is just a record of biological history, not a recount of lived experiences. Incidentally, this particular trope in sci-fi bugs the piss out of me for this reason. When they have a clone and they instantly retain all the memories, it's like, that's not how genetics works. That's not how epigenetics works.
No.
If you took my blood when I was 13 years old and cloned me, congrats. You've cloned a 13-year-old who has none of adult me's memories or experiences. And even that 13-year-old won't have my memories or experiences.
Correct.
You made a human-shaped copy that is a roughly tabula rasa at that point. Good job.
And even speaking of epigenetics, it won't be identical to you because there's been quite a number of changes in the, more than doubled that lifespan since then.
Right.
So yeah, not extensive changes, right? Epigenetics doesn't work to that degree, but there have been some, right? Your genome is different now than it was then, not by a ton, but very slightly.
Right. Well, like one thing that might have been unexpressed is, so my diabetes didn't make itself known until I was in some really, really rough shape. I went into the hospital for appendicitis. They took out my appendix, went, wow, this is just starting to go. And oh, by the way, congrats, you have diabetes now. Which is a thing that can happen because your genetic your genetic markers might not kick in until and unless you're in extreme stress.
Yeah.
Congrats, you had surgery. Your body said, well, we're diabetic now.
Yeah. Congrats.
It's my X gene decided to experience this particular way of being. Yay.
It's never good things either. It's
No.
like your genetics always come with bad news.
I can't shoot shit out of my eyes. I can't control the weather. Oh, this is horse shit.
Yeah, right? You don't have punch beams coming out of your eyes?
God, it would be insufferable with Cyclops, though. I mean, it's Cyclops.
Yeah,
so.
I'm resisting the urge to draw comparisons between you and Cyclops because there's more than a couple.
Wow. Wolverine's my favorite X-Men. You can fuck right off with that.
I mean, you're entitled to bad decisions.
I'm here for a good time, not a long time.
Says the Wolverine fan?
Yeah, I was gonna say Wolverine's how old?
I mean, the age is a nice byproduct. He certainly has made a lot of really fucking stupid choices.
That's true.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, it's kind of nice when you're immortal. You just can do that. So.
Right.
Complete tangent, but the thought occurred to me, and this is diving into another thing that I brought up to Kevin. How to phrase this?
With words.
Yes, thank you, Sarenth. That's extremely helpful.
I aim to help.
You occasionally succeed.
I'll drink for you.
I can't think of a good way to phrase this, so I'm just going to kind of talk around it for a second. Where, or rather, I'm going to phrase it badly and then explain as needed.
Speak, goddammit!
I'm trying. I was up at 5 o'clock this morning. Leave me alone. Where? Well, I guess baseline question is: do you have an understanding of what I mean when I say the word animism?
A very basic.
Okay. The idea that anything can be ensouled,
right,
and many things are, and that there are spirits in the world beyond living things. The basic level, right? That gets really complicated because different cultures have very different ideas on that, and etc.
Right.
But that's not important right now.
Right. Where would you say you fall on an animism scale from like hard no, there are only limited souls, like maybe humans, maybe animals, to like yes, full animism?
Interesting. I can't answer this question without committing heresy. But technically, it's only heresy if I teach it, not if I believe it. So with that in mind,
we will take your pastor cap off.
If you don't want to answer, that is okay.
No. And the quick answer is I have no idea.
Fair.
Right?
That is totally fair.
I believe in the omnipresence of God's Spirit, in the Holy Spirit. I believe that God created everything, from the sand to the trees to the rocks to everything. I love that chat, by the way.
It's a very good
But-
chat.
I believe there are ways that things can come together that are bigger than the sum of its parts. And we do that as humans, right? A human is more than just flesh, bone, gut. Um, but I think that exists within creation as well. One of the ways we have not that long ago learned about it is just the extent of tree systems and how trees communicate to each other, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, do I believe that there is a spiritual presence in the midst of that? I wouldn't say we couldn't. I wouldn't say we couldn't. So, I could never discount that. The way that nature relates to itself within ecological systems is fascinating and mysterious. Um, and I do believe firmly that when we talk about salvation, when we talk about redemption, it is not just for the human being, it is for all of creation. Uh, and so that would not refute that.
Mhm.
Do I believe they have individual, like there are tree spirits versus river spirits? Probably not quite that far.
Okay.
Um, but gosh, I never want to say God can't or God
Yeah.
won't. God won't, I'll say occasionally. God can't, I would never say. Um, so that is my very roundabout answer. I don't know how much it answered.
No, that is quite a lot to chew on, and I really appreciate both the breadth and depth there, because frankly, an off the cuff answer of one or the other is not, it's not helpful. Frankly.
This isn't a gotcha show. Like,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's tough when you're trying to understand. It's ants trying to understand black holes, right? We're trying to reach well beyond our capability. And so it takes imagination, it takes faith, it takes luck. And it all comes through my lived experience, right? We are our own filters, our own lenses. Um, and so these are things that I love to encourage my parishioners, my friends, my family to wrestle with. Think about it. Um, do I think God will love me any less if I get it wrong? No. I think God will say, "You stupid human." And I think that is a very frequent phrase on the Lord's lips. But so I don't know. Yeah, this is also something, frankly, I haven't given too much thought for. There is a one place where we call it panentheism,
Mhm.
which is kind of like this emergent spirit within creation. That is a heresy.
Really?
It is documented as a heresy.
Yep.
But by golly, there are some heresies that are like, whoa, that's a heresy, and I understand why. And then there are those ones that are like, it's a heresy, but
is it really?
is it really? A little bit?
Really? Panentheism is considered a heresy? That's hilarious to me.
Yeah, because
Oh,
it is
yeah.
too close to a polytheistic understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
And I mean, you will, of course, know this. Christians are absolutely allergic to anything polytheistic, unless it involves the saints or something like that.
Saints
But
or
I'm not
angels.
Catholic, so I won't go into those waters.
That's okay. I will. So
Please.
one of the things that I appreciated as a Catholic was the connection to nature. I was confirmed under Saint Francis de Assisi, and so Saint Francis's big shindig is connecting with nature. He would call the sun and the moon brother and sister.
Yes, absolutely.
So to me, animism is completely compatible with Christian theology from that perspective, but I also understand that Lutheran theology is very this is the way, this is how we do things, and this is a very shall we say staid way of stating faith.
Yeah, I will say that is true largely. Going back to beginning this conversation on the brief Lutheran history we all got, The LCA is really challenging that.
Good.
It is absolutely alive and well within the Missouri Synod, within the Wisconsin Synod especially, which are much more what we call theological conservative, which is different than political conservative. Um, they are way on the theological conservative, which is more fundamentalist,
Yep.
very literal. We are not. We are theologically progressive. We understand that some things in the Bible happened historically true and are accurate and good. And some things are probably more like metaphors or stories, or just an account of holy people wrestling with these ideas. For instance, I do not believe that Job as an individual existed. I believe that Job is a fascinating story about the problem of evil, um, and about having terrible friends, and about the relationship between.
Sorry, that kills me.
Read Job. His friends are terrible.
Oh, his friends are assholes.
Yeah.
Like, Job, you could do so much better.
And the relationship between what does it mean for a mortal to try and wrap their head around what God is thinking. And so, if you don't know this, for any of those listeners who want to read the Bible, um, Job was great, had everything going for him. Satan said to God that the only reason that Job loved God is because everything was great, and who wouldn't love God when everything's great? And so God takes everything away from Job. Everything. He gives him disease. He kills his wealth, kills his family, except his wife. Um, but kills his children, and just like everything horrible to Job. And Job remains faithful, but he keeps asking God, why? Why did you do this? Why did you do this? And God finally answers Job in the least satisfying answer, which is, don't pretend you can understand. Were you there? I think one of the quotes is, were you there at the pillars of creation? You do not understand. And Job says, okay. And this is the interesting part that a lot of people don't know. That's where the story was supposed to end. But hundreds of years later, approximately 300 years later, scribes said, that's a shitty ending. And so they added a whole other chapter to Job where it's God said, well, you proved your faith. And they gave Job like twice the wealth and twice the health and twice the family, which is hilarious because that's what, like, God, you killed my children. Here's more. As if that replaces the first children, but
Right.
they added this happy ending because they could not let it sit.
It
And
is
I think that's a
deeply
huge crime.
uncomfortable. Yeah,
I
it's
think
deeply
that's a huge
uncomfortable to
crime.
sit with that because,
Of
like,
course it is.
you don't understand. Like, at some point, you have to actually accept. You don't. If this is a God of all creation, this. Pardon me for blaspheming, but this motherfucker is literally beyond your ken. You can't
Right?
fathom it. Like,
Absolutely. And where I was getting at with the metaphor and the more progressive Christian churches with which
mhm.
includes the ELCA, is I don't believe Job is a historical event. And if it is, that's a shitty God. Like, let me
Thank
be on
you.
the record for saying that a God who plays a wager with Satan to test someone's faith by making their life awful, that is not a good God. That is not the God of Jesus, the God I understand.
I
And so I
cannot tell
believe,
you how much I appreciate hearing that from a pastor's lips.
absolutely. And so I believe very firmly that that is a story to teach us something. Something beyond, well, God makes wagers and then tests us, because I don't believe that's true. Why would God ever feel like intimidated by Satan, which means accuser, right? Hasatan, the accuser. Um, like, grow up, God.
Right?
Don't do this. I was like, oh yeah, you made fun of me? Well, I'll show you. That's a really shitty God. And so let's look at the story for what it is and learn from it. I have no recollection of why I was talking about progressive in the ELC. Oh, that the church is a little less like cut and dry of like you have to fit inside this box, the ELCA, but a lot of my members are not. And so if I tell my members, and I do because that's the kind of pastor I am, is I don't coddle. I don't believe that Job was a historical event. That's very shocking for a lot of people. That's very it can cause a lot of faith whiplash for people because they're suddenly coming to terms that, and this is a philosophical norm, not all truth is the same kind of truth. We do not take truth as equal. Aesop's fables hold truth. History books, hopefully, hold truth. They are not the same kinds of truth.
Yeah.
So the Bible is true, but not always in the way you think it is. And we gotta especially couch that in that understanding of, is this really the God of Jesus? Is this really the God that we understand? Because the God of Job is not the God I will worship. Because that I don't think that God is worth worshiping. But I think that it reveals something deeper. And that's something we can hang on to in faith.
Okay, so as a polytheist, I find Yahweh, especially from the Christian lens, to be interesting because he's a case study in, if you follow the Bible as a kind of timeline for how this God grows from a very distinct God of storms and war, as he is known in the historical record, into a, lacking a better term, a very large and important God.
Sure.
When you see that archaeological arc from a very minor storm god into the big L, as it were, there's an interesting thing as a polytheist that I see take place, because it's like you can look at the Bible as God growing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And as a, like, yes, you've got Genesis 1, and then you've got the second creation in Genesis, I think, 3.
Genesis 2.
Genesis
They
2,
do
thank
put
you.
them next to each other. And most people, and this gets back to it, like a lot of Christians don't realize there are two creation stories.
Right.
And they're right next to each other. And they're right in the beginning.
God
Which
said,
also tells me that most Christians don't read the Bible.
Yeah. And this gets back to a thing that we as polytheists have huge issues with, and I think it stems from, and I'm going to use this term because it's the term that we use, Christian baggage, which is because most polytheists were Christians who
absolutely
converted, right? And also because of the kind of Christian overculture, which is very theologically conservative. It is mythically literal, right?
Yes.
If you take the Bible as a set of myths, which it is from a strictly anthropological standpoint,
yes,
that's just how it is.
It should not be an assault on your God to say that these are a group of stories.
Yeah, right. Like,
absolutely. And that's why I tell people is, no, let me rephrase that. This is what I think. I don't say this because more harm than good will come out of it.
Understood.
Is your faith so weak that the mere insistence that it is more complex than you thought before this conversation is a threat to the entire thing? It's the same thing I tell, we had this is going on a bit of a tangent, not me.
We don't know good company. Let's go.
A mom refused to let her child in high school do a world religion course because it was teaching the pillars of Islam and the Tanakh from the Jewish tradition, their understanding of the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And it was teaching, I'm going to butcher this, the Bhagavad Gita, which
Bhagavad Gita.
Bhagavad Gita.
Nope. Bhagavad Gita.
Bhagavad Gita, which I believe is not Jew. Goodness, I'm 3 beers in. A Buddhist text. A Buddhist text.
Hindu yep.
Text. Thank you. And she said that because her son was Christian, She had they had no rights to indoctrinate her son. And my response is the local pastor, I went on record as saying, is your faith so weak that your son's uh, just mere connection, like just literally learning for what? It's public school system, 2 days on the rich history of Islam or of Hinduism, especially. It's so much older and has so much splinters and nuances to it, that the mere like contact with it would shatter his faith, would shatter your faith through him. It's absurd.
Yeah.
Either you are simply incredibly stupid. I didn't say that.
No.
I thought it.
Yeah.
Or your faith is so flimsy that the mere a mere breeze could blow it over, and that faith-based aside, and this is the realm of public school. Public school is supposed to be preparing people for the world. It's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And guess what? Muslims exist.
Right?
Right? Hindus exist. Right? And so if you want to be a good citizen, having a very, very 1 week crash course, 1 hour a day into 6,000 years of history and culture gives you just a little bit of understanding when you inevitably be friends with them, work with them, talk with them, because they are your humans too. They are your siblings in this world. And as Christians, I will say siblings who are created in the image of God. And it is your responsibility to treat them with respect. And you don't do that by refusing to learn some tiny, tiny piece of them. That is absolutely bullshit.
Well, and if you are to do as Jesus commanded, to love your neighbor as yourself, how can you do that without understanding them?
Absolutely.
Like, full stop. How can you do that without understanding them?
He literally goes out of his way to say, if these things must be done in love. And the very famous quote for St. Paul with regards to, I think it's the Corinthians, where he talks about how, if I have all these things but I don't have love, I have nothing. And Paul's a piece of work, but that's beyond, that's a whole other conversation. But that quote always sticks with me. Because it's very echoes the truth of Christ, in that how can I look at my neighbor and not seek to know them?
Right.
Like, they're not a neighbor at that point, they're a stranger.
Right.
And you are intentionally keeping them at arm's length. And even the story of Jesus with the Samaritan, I believe it is, at the well.
The Samaritan woman.
Yes, the Samaritan woman at the well. Like, he embraces the stranger. It was not just he's embracing the tax collector and the leper and the whores. He is also embracing the abject stranger.
Which, for added context, because a lot of people wouldn't think of this, in that time period, that meant that person had a completely different religious worldview. That person wasn't Jewish, right?
Right.
She would have thought she was. But the Jewish church, like the Jewish faith, would have regarded, not dissimilar to how a lot of Christians feel about the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Right? The Church of Latter-day Saints say we are Christian. Most of Christianity says, no, you are not.
Yeah.
Right. And so the Samaritan woman, I won't go into that. But the Samaritan faith and the Jewish faith got separated when the temple was destroyed,
right,
and developed differently. And so 500 years later, they were completely unrecognizable to each other.
Yeah.
She was a foreign faith and a woman. And at that time, that's not me saying it. That's
no.
Into context.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sarenth is laughing at the comment. Yeah, other religions existing that like Minecraft server. Sorry, I did not mean to interrupt. Just had to highlight that for the L's. Like,
Hallelujah.
yeah.
So really quick, I want to actually there's a lot of really good stuff in the
Yeah, please.
chat. So this quote especially stuck out to me. It's truth versus literalism. I found a lot of solace in the Book of Job when I was a Catholic. I think it's because it allowed me to experience difficult things without viewing them as punishment for something I did wrong.
Yes.
I.e., most people have difficulties. It's just part of life. Kat noted that simplified versions don't include both creations.
They smush them together.
They do.
Yeah.
They just completely pretend that it's one creation story.
Emily said she went to a Catholic all-girls high school. I was very grateful that our senior year included a well-taught world religions course. My dad also had this experience. So this is like at least one thing the Catholic Church with their schools gets right. Others religions exist?
Yeah, right.
Learning a new language does not mean you'll change all your cultural practices and views of the one new language because you learn it. It just helps the communication.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Tangent. Yes. So it's for me, like, even as a Christian, like, coming to understand other worldviews did not challenge my faith, it enriched it. And I think
it should.
That enrichment is something to be celebrated on all corners, because when we can reach across the proverbial or literal aisle and get to know somebody, our experience of ourselves and our community, our human community, our sense of humanity increases. And having exchange and dialogue like on this show, for me is a really important touchstone, if for no other reason than, okay, cool, we're sitting around, we're having a drink, we're talking theology, we're talking about stuff that's like, this is how we view the world. This is the stuff of how we view the world. And I'm talking about this over drinks. Like, it's not that I don't take it seriously, but it's that I take my responsibility with hospitality seriously enough that this is something I'm willing to dialogue over in a sacred setting. For me, drinking is sacred. I very much take that joke that some folks say, quite literally, like beer and wine and such is how God wants us to know we want to be happy.
Well, beer. Okay, so beer is bread, right?
Right.
So beer is just beer and wine is communion. It's Holy Communion. It's bread and wine.
Yeah,
it's just liquid bread.
Speaking of which, I'm drinking a Golden Drac for the first time. I've never had this. It's a dark red triple ale from Belgium. It's like 10.5% ABV. I've been looking forward to. So I cracked it on this occasion.
A triple, yeah.
Oh, that's divine. That is divine.
Slightly tangential. I'm a really love-hate with Belgian beers, because it genuinely, and half of it's my mood and half of it's the beer. I either want to have nothing else for the rest of my life until I change my mood, or I never want to taste this again.
Golden Drac.
Yeah.
It is fucking amazing. This is some of the best beer I've had.
Or as John says, beer is wet bread.
Truth. Funny you should say beer is wet bread.
A little gross.
I mean, that's kind of how beer came about, they figure. So,
Yeah.
But I think, speaking of one bread, one body, that for me is that universality of communion with the divine, communion with the other. If you take the teachings seriously in terms of grace, in terms of hospitality, and I say this as a heathen, hospitality is perhaps our foremost virtue. And you cannot be hospitable if you are going to exist in a consistent state of hostility.
Yeah.
Right.
If the only time that you honor your ancestors is when you're fighting, you will not honor all your ancestors. It's worth pointing out, because there's this machismo that runs through modern heathenry that belies that many of the stories talk about what wonderful peacemakers many of the Jarls in the stories were, because it's as a backdrop to this was like the unsolvable blood feud. Like this immensely powerful peacemaker couldn't solve this shit. Like part of the point of some of these stories is like, this is what it looks like when blood feuds go too far. See like half the Volsunga saga.
Yeah.
Well,
and this is where we get into what I was talking about, right? Mythic literalism is a pernicious problem that runs through so many faiths.
Heathenry is rife with that shit.
And it's such an issue. Like, yo, stop. These are stories. And further, most of these, even if you go far enough back, even the tradition that Christianity evolved out of was originally an oral tradition.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Like, you go far enough back, all of these are oral traditions. They were not. Worship of the written word is a whole problem. But mythic literalism is, I think, its child.
Mythic literalism is a fucking intellectual poison.
It really is. And it's like,
absolutely.
If you cannot accept that these are stories meant to teach you things and are not always meant to be understood to be literally true, and I would say most of the time not meant to be understood as literally true, and I'm speaking broadly of mythology, not one particular set of mythology, then you're going to have a really hard time with connecting with the divine. Like,
yeah. You're gonna be, you build a box around yourself and you have to sit in it, and frankly you have to eat in it, you have to shit in it, you have to, and it's a disgusting way to live, right?
Yeah.
You open your mind to things. There are certain things that are beyond our ability to understand, to just be told. I cannot express to you and tell you faith,
right?
But I can tell a story.
Yeah.
And so stories are so powerful in that way. But the minute you like devolve into literalism, you've completely lost the entire point of the story, and you're so much further away from the truth I was trying to convey.
Exactly.
Why did Jesus taught in parables? For this reason.
Yeah. Right. Really quick.
Yeah.
Kat asks this question: is ancestor work of any kind something that clicks anywhere? I think this is for you, Kevin.
Okay.
How does the Lutheran Church relate to your ancestors? Because like Catholicism has like the lineage of saints, popes, etc., going back to Peter.
Right.
Is there anything similar in that vein for you folks, or ancestors generally speaking? How do you relate to that?
Two answers. The first one is kind of interesting in its own way. So we have this idea of the apostolic succession. And so this is speaking only to priests. Apostolic succession is that Jesus ordained Peter.
Correct.
Peter ordained people. All the way through, every person who is ordained within the church, which would then become the Catholic Church during the schism, and then more schisms and schisms and schisms. But up until Luther, every priest was ordained by a bishop who was also ordained by a bishop. And so there is this idea of apostolic succession that reached all the way back to Jesus. And it was theoretically, obviously we can't prove this, but theoretically it was unbroken. Luther broke it. Because when Luther did hit the Reformation, started the Reformation, he was excommunicated. And so when they started to realize this is no longer a reform movement, this is a schism, because Luther did not want to schism the church. He wanted to change the Catholic Church, and that failed, and that's what caused the schism, right?
Yeah.
And there were simultaneous. It wasn't just Luther. You had the Reform movement, the Anabaptist movement, the Anglican movement. So it broke it. Fast forward 500 years to the 1990s. And the ELCA is in conversation with, we have what we call full communion partners. These are other denominations that we have said are so good that if one of their priests comes to a Lutheran congregation, we're cool with that. And we can commune at each other's churches, no questions asked. And I can go and pastor at their churches. I could get called. And this is the United Methodist Church, the Episcopalian Church, the Presbyterian Church, PCUSA. There are 6 in total. During the conversation with the Episcopalians, and if you don't know this, the Episcopalians are just the American version of Anglicans.
Right.
Okay.
The Anglicans and therefore the Episcopalians were obsessed with apostolic succession. It's a huge deal. And so the biggest barrier, they're like, we want to be full communion partners, but if Jesus didn't lay his hands through all of these people to your pastor, that pastor is not allowed to preside at our congregation. And so this was the solution that they had. From the moment it was signed in 1998. The document was called a Call to Common Mission, where we became full communion partners. Every pastor in the ELCA had to be ordained by both a Lutheran, an ELCA bishop, and an Anglican bishop. So far, grafting us back in to the line of succession. So I am in the apostolic succession to make the Episcopalians happy.
Oh, that is amazing ancestor work. That's hilarious.
So there's the first answer to that we have this idea of the conveyance of the call through the ordination rite. When it comes to non-priests, the laity, we do not. So this has 2 answers, but I'll be very quick.
I appreciate
what we
this.
teach and what people believe are completely different on this.
Fair.
The congregation is not in lockstep with the ELCA, with the theologians. What people believe is when Grandma died, she went to heaven, and now she looks down on me and may even either be an angel, which is wrong. Angels are different beings than us.
Right.
Or will send an angel, a guardian angel, to help me. That's what people believe. What the ELCA teaches is no. There's no one in heaven yet. Because
Interesting.
Because the second coming has not happened. When we die, you are dead. And it is only on the last day when Jesus comes back through the second coming that the dead will be raised, so that all the dead will be raised at the same time. So theologically speaking, Grandma is not looking down on you. Now there's one big caveat to this. Time is human. It is locked in our physical reality.
Right.
And so Grandma being raised, or me being raised at the end of days, does not necessarily mean she's not also there now, because now and then don't have meaning. And so at that point, we just say, hey, when we die, we'll find out.
I appreciate that, because that has just enough humility to say, I don't fucking know, but just enough theological edge to give people something to hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that, because that is such a very, how do I put it? Spirited way of reading The Last Judgment.
Mm-hmm. And something that when I'm having these conversations, and this is a common one I have with my folks, people are obsessed with the afterlife. What happens when I die, Pastor, right? Am I going to heaven? Is that person going to hell? What does that look like? My answer is usually the same: to care for them, because they're asking out of distress, right?
Yeah.
So I need to care for them. And secondly, to reorientate them. Jesus had many opportunities to talk about death and the afterlife, and he does not do it. Why? Because to Jesus, that's not the important part. What happens when we die is up to God. Full stop.
Right.
It will be what it is. And we do get some ideas of what that is. The lion will lay down with the lamb, and God will wipe every tear from your eye, things like that. That's from the prophet Isaiah. Um, but largely, Jesus says, while you're thinking about when you die, how about think about tomorrow?
Right.
Think about your
How
neighbor right now.
how about you live?
How about you live? And the biggest thing I always tell people is salvation is not an event that happens after you die. Salvation is a reality you have the opportunity through the grace of God to live right now. And if you believe that's true, and as a Christian you have to, that's kind of basic Christianity. If you believe that's true, why the fuck aren't you acting like it? Right? God, and I say this tritely, God loves you. You are saved by it. So go and act like it by giving your bread to your neighbor, by
Right.
sitting down and listening to their stories because people are lonely, right? By being the best human you can be. Understanding you'll fail. Absolutely. That's not the point. The point is that if God loves you so much, how can that not change everything about who you are? That is salvation. And not many of us experience that while we are alive, unfortunately.
It occurs to me, from a polytheist lens, we have several gods whose epithets are Salvatore or Liber, whose the translation for these epithets are Savior or Liberator.
Mhm.
And it occurs to me that the Christos, the Anointed One, also shares in this, in no small part because it is not merely the liberation of spirit, which that merely is doing a lot of heavy lifting, I know. But it is also the liberation from the whipping and the woundings would carry no weight if we did not relate to them. The incarnation was a necessary component in no small part because God needed to make himself human for salvific narrative purposes, but also because I think the humanity of Christ is an important component of it. It's something that's shared with a lot of our dying and resurrecting gods. Without saying they're a one-to-one, just to be clear. Many of our gods of death and resurrection will die and resurrect for many different reasons. But what is often a hallmark of many of these stories is they bring things back with them that everybody benefits from. Even Othin, who hanged for himself for wisdom, brings it back to all the worlds. Everybody gets runes. Everybody gets writing and wisdom. Dionysus pretty much openly admonishes people to be free. I can scarce think of a god who has Liber or Salvatore as an epithet whose purpose when they have that epithet is not freeing people regardless of their station.
Right.
Well, and that's, I mean, even without those epithets, because those epithets don't ring true for me for Freyr, for example.
Sure.
Who, Kevin, because you probably don't know this, let me brief explanation.
Sure.
Freyr for me, I initiated under him as a priest. I do not have a congregation or anything like that. Priest, I distinguish between priesthood and clergy. That's a whole other conversation. Worship versus serving people, whole thing. Anyway, Freyr, I've received a mythic cycle about half of, maybe less than half of, a mythic cycle.
It's a revelation in process.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. I have a lot of work to do. It's fine. More than one book. uh, where he, through the course of the year, dies, goes to the underworld, and then comes back and is reborn year after year after year. And it's to do with the sun cycle and cycle of seasons and things like that. So Liber and Salvatore do not ring true for me, but in the myths that I have received from him, it's very much community is a huge aspect of it, and it's very much I am doing this for you so that you can benefit from it, because it is good and right that everyone should benefit from the actions that I am taking.
Mhm.
Right? It's
Absolutely.
yeah. And another actually key component of it that's interesting is the choice. Very specifically in both when he dies and when he leaves the underworld and travels back, he puts it to community vote. He will not go without the permission of his people, which I'm struggling to find the exact way it ties in, but it feels emotionally to me like it's on the same chord as kind of what we're talking about. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else, but
it does to me. The way that I tie it into is that the salvation Christ offers with his death and resurrection, with the shedding of his blood, with being God incarnate, is a very similar thing in the same vein that Freyr makes the wheat grow. In that the shedding of God's blood renews the land and renews the cycle of life, because without that shedding of blood, there is not that relationship tie.
Mhm.
Without that shedding of life that we all experience, there is almost an untapped potential God needed to reach out to his people with. There is that relationality. If nothing else, even if we take the Christ story of the death and resurrection of Christ as merely a story, and again, merely is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Even if we take this merely as a story, merely as Freyr being the sheaf of wheat being struck down, the sowing of the seed of the bread of life is not nothing.
yeah.
Right.
The sowing of the bread of community, of life itself, whether you're talking Freyr or Christ, is not nothing. I think these narratives feel very similar in that result of selflessness being a calling back to their people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And for me, it goes back to what I said about the book of Job and who God is. God telling me that I will not need to feel pain anymore, that that every tear will be wiped away, means nothing to me if God doesn't know what pain is, if God never cries, if God doesn't feel betrayal. What does a God have to do with death? What does gods don't have to die, right? My God chose to. And that means everything to me. Because a God who wouldn't choose to doesn't love me fullest. And Jesus actually predicts this, right? What is the greatest gift? The greatest act of love is to die for someone else, right? And then Jesus does that. And so a God who doesn't have to go through these horrible, horrible human things, but chooses to, that's the God I worship.
I would also point out that theologically speaking, I always found it really interesting, because the result of Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of tree of knowledge of good and evil was that then they knew death. And that rather than be completely separate in all time from that choice, God says, all right, So your ancestors made a really shit decision once upon a time, and I am going to share in that now.
Interesting. So here's an interesting tidbit that most people, it's a, you have to really get in the weeds.
Okay.
Please.
Before the fall,
Mhm.
before the serpent tempts, they were already going to die.
Right.
Death is not a part of the fall.
Right.
And we know this because God says, in a polytheistic way, I might mind you, because for anyone who does not know, early Judaism was
Very
polytheistic.
polytheistic.
Very polytheistic. It wasn't until the Josiah reforms that they try to move away from that, but it gets complicated.
Yeah.
But the quote from the Bible, and I don't have my Bible in front of me, but it says something like this: that after they ate the apple, right, or the fruit, which is probably a fig, not an apple. After they succumb to temptation, the line is, "And we must kick them out of the garden, for that they might eat from the fruit of the tree of eternal life and become like us." The
Right.
problem with the tree of knowledge of good and evil was less about that tree, but that there was another tree with the fruit of eternal life, which says that they were never supposed to live forever.
Right.
Yeah.
That was what they were trying to avoid. And so death is a natural part of life, but it is warped because of the existence of sin, of evil.
So it's Genesis 3:22. I'm looking at the Good News translation. Then the Lord God said, "Now these human beings have become like one of us and have knowledge of what is good and what is bad. They must not be allowed to take fruit from the tree that gives life, eat it, and live forever." So the Lord God sent them out of the Garden of Eden and made them cultivate the soil from which they had been formed. Then at the east side of the garden, he put living creatures in a flaming sword which turned in all directions. This was to keep anyone from coming near the tree that gives life.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
It's interesting how much of the polytheism that translation cut out, because very distinctly in that section, Adonai.
There's a lot of we. There's a lot of we.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For context, I do not say, out of respect for Jews who have asked people not to, I say Adonai rather than the Tetragrammaton. That's not a judgment. That's just a choice that I make.
Right.
But Adonai says in that portion very clearly actually it's El, not Adonai.
It's El, not Adonai. Yeah.
Right. El is speaking to his children and the other gods in the divine council.
Absolutely.
Very specifically. It's extremely polytheistic.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah,
and no Christian theologian or historian worth their salt would disagree with that. It is clear as day. It was the ancient Jewish faith up until Josiah's reforms was firmly and fully polytheistic. Adonai was the chief and the only one worth worshiping, sure, but there are a ton of gods.
Yeah, right.
It should say something that YHVH becomes the big head after the Reformation.
Yeah. Well, and it's like going back a bit to the animism discussion, right? There are a multitude of spirits and other things that make their presence known in the stories in the Bible, right? Like Jesus confronts a number of them, and that's the whole thing, right?
Yeah, it's a big part of Jesus' ministry,
right?
And some of those spirits are good, and some of them are bad, right? Some are unclean, like the ones that are driven into the herd of pigs, and then some of them are very much not, and it's fine.
Right. And what I find really funny about that too is, like, the Witch of Endor would have had no power to connect Saul if there was nothing there. There's all these different narratives that are in these stories, and even if we only look at them as stories, there's a really interesting thing that it says about creation, in that the unfathomable is so unfathomable that you're reaching. that you're trying, you're grasping. And I think, as we mentioned with the story of Job, that's actually kind of the point.
Yeah.
But I really quickly, I want to highlight some of these points. There's a lot of different conversations, so I guess we have Kevin back. Yes, we do.
Anytime,
Sure.
let me know.
Excellent. The death of one is benefit the many is a pretty common thing across a lot of stories now that we're talking about it. Yeah.
Yes.
Figs are delicious, no judgment here. Yeah, figs are friggin' awesome. So why the push for monotheism then? Power.
Yeah. So I won't dig into the theological side, but historically, it's because the royalty at the time, and I believe it was a specific Jewish king, or Judaic king specifically, I believe, pushed for it because it aligned well with his politics and his accumulation of power, and kind of control, roughly.
It's worth pointing out that even the kings of this period kind of had to bow to polytheism a little bit, because the altar to Ashura was found right next to Yahweh's altar at this point in time.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. Ashura was very prevalent to the point that it was a problem during Josiah's reign.
Right.
And so, if for anyone who doesn't know, Ashura was a goddess of fertility, and was considered the consort of Adonai. And so, if you read the Bible, a lot of translations are bad. If you want help with translations, I'm more than happy to get it. Some are better than others, but none of them are great. But so they gloss over these things. They interpret it. If you see in the Deuteronomistic histories, which is Deuteronomy, a little bit in Leviticus, references to poles, that's Ashra. Because she was worshipped with what they call Ashura's poles.
Yep.
And so a lot of times the translations will miss that, and they will talk about like taking down the poles, or the poles in high places, because high places were holy places. That was talking about Ashura worship.
Yeah.
There's actually, I think, a quote from, I believe it was Jesus, who talks about a craftsperson bringing in a fresh tree and carving it. And what people usually interpret this as like, oh, this is where the Christmas tree comes from. It's like, no, they're talking about idols, guys.
Yeah. Oh, don't get me started on Christians and their expert use of taking other people's shit and saying that was Christian all along. The amount of people I have to tell that candy canes are not originally Christian because of the J for Jesus and the red for the blood of Christ. It's to the point my congregation has heard this spiel, and they will bring it up to annoy me. Out of fun and good love. They're like, well, Pastor, can we do a whole candy cane exhibit? I'm like, shut up. It annoys the shit out of me. No, the amount of co-opting and syncretism within Christianity is absurd. And at times it's absurd funny, and at times it's absurd completely culturally genocidal. Like they have the harm that it has done, not to make too light of it, is pretty irreparable.
There is syncretism, which is a natural thing that occurs all over the world between all religions, right? You run into each other, you exchange ideas.
Absolutely.
And then there is, I'm going to take that. No, you can't have it back. Those are different things. And
it's the British Museum of
yes.
Which I also want to point out, pagans aren't any fucking better. Like,
no.
We're absolutely not.
We will absolutely, like, there are some heathens who will die on the hill that Christmas trees are definitely pagan in origin. And I'm like, these are 16th century guys. 15th, 16th century. Call them your shit.
They're syncretic. That's what it is. They're syncretic. That's what it is.
That's what it is. It's syncretic. It is a Christian syncretism of a pagan practice that then got syncretized back into heathen practice.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
And Kat says, Kevin, did you just offer a bunch of pagans a Bible study session? No, seriously, it might be cool. I agree. Also, you can when you join the if you join us for the after party, please, by all means, put your best translations in chat because that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, I will.
I'm curious on the ELCA view on Mary. I know a number of pagans who include her in their practice. Mother Mary.
So Mary's a problem. And the biggest problem is the deep German, and we're in German Lutheran area. If you go to like Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, the Oda, it's a whole region of the ELCA. We call it the Oda region.
Nice.
They are the Nordic Lutherans. This is a German Lutheran problem. Well, we don't want to be like the Catholics. And it's so ingrained in the cultural zeitgeist of German Lutherans that anything that even smells Catholic is abhorrent. So with Mary, how dare you suggest that Mary is worth adoration? How dare you? Which is completely false. Mary is worth adoration. And this is the more official position, which is she is the person God chose.
Right.
To bring God into this world. And that is the saint of saints, right?
Right.
Now, the line is here. I do not pray to Mary.
Sure.
I pray to Jesus. I pray to God, the Trinity, and let's not do Trinitarian theology.
That's another show.
That's a different show, and a few more beverages. I do not pray to Mary because why would you ever pray for the second in command or the third in command?
Right.
Why would you ever go and you have the most important war and the most important battle in history and go to the second lieutenant? No, you go to the 5-star general, you go to God. And so Lutherans, we understand that saints are worth recognizing. They're worth adoring, adoration, right? They are worth exemplifying, bringing their faith practices into our life and using them as models. But we do not pray to them.
So what you're telling me is that Mary is worthy of adoration. And I know I'm bomb throwing here because I know the Lutheran thing about adoration.
Yes, you can adore her. And she should be. Amazing person. Not for the reasons you think. Everyone who thinks of meek and mild Mary needs to reread Luke chapter 1 and the Magnificat.
Shit.
Meek and mild Mary was a 13-year-old girl who was like, I'm going to give birth to God. That's fantastic. Let's tear down the powerful. Let's let them starve to death. Let's crush them under our peasant feet. That is the song of Mary.
She is very much a rebel.
I ad-libbed a little bit, but like she's a radical, right? And that's who God chooses. And so Mary is worth making an example of really, like, she exemplifies what it means to have faith. She exemplifies everything that God wants, which is somebody who is outcast, who is undervalued, who is unordinary in her ordinariness, right? And believes God even in the impossible moment. Right? And something we don't talk about a lot, but I think is also worth mentioning, Joseph's faith.
Right.
My engaged to-be bride is pregnant with God. Are you shitting me?
Right. Right.
Like, really? But he believes her and he shelters her and stays with her. And actually, we have some extra biblical evidence that he got a lot of heat from that, flack from that, because obviously she's lying, right?
Yeah.
And he protected her from that. He stood by her. And you want an example of alpha males? Use what it means to be a man is to protect everyone around you. Right. I think that's what it means to be a human in general. I wouldn't delineate it by gender. But Joseph exemplified what it means to love, which is to trust even when trust is impossible. Now, people also have good boundaries, like don't just blindly believe everything that people tell you because you love
Gabriel
them.
had to come to him and like, look, here's what's going on, Joe.
Yeah.
Like, all right, look, God, this is a lot to take in. This
Any
other person, this smells like bullshit.
One of the best Christmas sermons I ever heard, I was growing up, was called "What if it was a girl?" And the whole thing was that Mary and the angel told Joseph that she was going to bear the Son of God. And so on the night that Jesus was born, Joseph went, "It's a boy!" Because if it was a girl, it would have shattered everything. Hallelujah. I hope that answers your question about Mary. So worth exemplifying, worth adoring, worth praising in a way, but we don't pray to, we don't deify her in the same way that I would suggest that the Catholic Church does what we call Mariolatry, which is idolatry in Mary.
Which is hilarious because as a Catholic, I was taught we're not worshiping her, we're asking for her intercession. We're asking for her.
Sure.
When it is too much. Well, when it's too much to talk to the 5-star general. When you cannot look the 5-star general in the face because there's shame or there's pain and you cannot bear to look your father in the face, you ask the mother.
Besides gender norms aside,
sure.
My point would
Catholic.
be, right. What is your relationship with God, the Creator? Then,
right.
That you are so intimidated. One of the best things I heard about faith, when it comes to guilt and shame, is unhealthy faith looks like, I fucked up. Don't tell my dad. Healthy faith is, I fucked up. I need to call my dad. What is your conception of God? Is it someone you need to hide your shame from, or is it to someone you go to for help?
So for Catholics, it's actually the latter. It's not even necessarily that you need protection from God or that
God's gonna whoop your ass.
Right. It's not even that. It's you need the courage that Mary has. You need the faith that Mary has.
Yeah.
Actually, this is actually an excellent rendition too. You talk to the general's mom because she has more pull with him.
That happens in the Bible. And people miss this.
They do.
Story. John, the Gospel of John. So in the Gospel of John, John is weird. If you're going to read the Gospels, don't read John first. Read Mark first.
Read Mark.
John is non-chronological, so the stories don't make sense if you try and make it into a timeline. Anyway, in John we have the 7 signs, and it'll actually say, and this was the first sign. And this was the second sign. The first sign of Jesus is the wedding at Cana, which is where Jesus will turn the water into wine. The whole story, though, is hilarious. So Jesus and Mary are at this wedding. And weddings in the ancient world, they were 3 days. The party. I mean, it was a party, right? And typically, you would start with your most expensive wine, and then you would whittle down to the slur, right? To the bad stuff at the end, because at that point nobody could see straight anyway. And to run out of wine was a huge faux pas, because not only did it make you seem stingy, it also was saying that the marriage was not one of abundance, and it was one of scarcity. And so they run out of wine, and Mary freaks out and says, Jesus, go help them. You're the Son of God. Do it. And Jesus tells Mary, what am I to you, a woman? Like a magician? Paraphrasing a little bit.
Yeah.
Mary looks at him and says, do it. And he does, because he's a good Jewish boy and he listens to his mama. But Jesus wasn't going to do it, and it is Mary's influence that forces him to do it. And I find that hilarious in so many ways, that there is this trite thing, this very human thing that Jesus does not want to get involved with, is not ready to reveal himself. But Mary says, do it. This is important to us. This is important to what it means to be human. And you are still learning what it means to be human. Here it is. And Jesus says, okay. And he does it. And it is not the worst wine, right? At the end of the party, it is the greatest wine anyone has ever drank. And that is another theme in the Gospel of John, is that God's love is not just a little love, it is abundance. It's not just a cup full, it is the cup pours over, right?
Yeah.
My cup runneth over. Yep.
My cup runneth over. Absolutely. I love that story, and I tell that joke. He's like, just like any good Jewish son listens to his mama.
I appreciate this is also true of many of our gods that choose to incarnate in human form, whether he is avatars or in various stories that we hear about. Gylfaginning comes to mind with the fooling of King Gylfi with Odin. Is that there's always a deeper purpose. It's not merely, I wanted to test the mortals. It's, you needed to learn something specific from this. In regards to Christ's resurrection, I think the humanity of Christ is an excellent teaching tool, but also an excellent point of relationality that absent and I think that this is a very important point that's missing from a lot of folks who dialogue on this, is that Christ had a whole life before the crucifixion story, right? Like, he had feelings, he had emotion, he had pain, he had to piss and shit just like the rest of us. And that relationality is actually important.
Yeah. If God doesn't do that, then God doesn't know me. Right? You cannot describe to someone who doesn't feel pain what pain is like. It's impossible. So God feels pain. So that when I feel pain and I say, God, this pain is overwhelming and I don't know if I can handle it, God can say, been there, bro.
Right? It's why I take so much joy and hope in so many of our gods, but also so many of our ancestors and spirits, in that even if we don't suffer the same, we have suffered, will suffer again. And I think that that's actually an important point of whether it's Freyr's myth that he's revealing to you, Maleck, or Christ's story as it portrays through the year. In the Catholic Church, there's there is a specific word for it, and of course it fucking escapes me when I try saying it.
The lectionary, or
yeah, it's something to that effect, where every day it has some sort of biblical story,
like the liturgical calendar.
Yeah, thank you, liturgical calendar. Yes. This is actually an important aspect of the liturgical calendar, because it's not merely about 365 days of Jesus. It's a life lived, an exemplar of, if you are to be Christ-like, what does that actually mean? Like, if you are to be Freyr-like, what does that actually mean? If I'm going to be Othin-like, what does that actually mean? And to my mind, it doesn't just mean I'm a swaggering one-eyed asshole all the time, although, that's part of it. But I think it says something that we can laugh about our gods, you included.
Oh, sure.
Sure. God has to have a sense of humor. Like,
you cannot look at the platypus, right, and tell me that God doesn't have a sense of humor. Same thing. Let me describe an animal to you. Ready? We're gonna make a large animal, right? We're gonna give it a huge body, like a ton of muscle, a literal tank, and then we're gonna give it toothpick legs, super thin legs. And these massive antlers that go completely sideways, not up, not back, sideways. So they're super wide. And where do we make their natural habitat? The forest, where they get stuck on the trees, right? With these massive antlers, these toothpick legs, and this pure body of a tank. And what is their greatest ability? Well, of course, they're fucking great swimmers. That, by the way, if you didn't catch on is the moose. Thank you, chat. Like, you cannot look at the Canadian moose. Like, did you know that they're great swimmers?
Oh yeah, like 40 miles an
fucking
hour.
Blew my mind, right? Can you imagine, like, you're hiking in the Rockies and you find this beautiful mountain lake and you go for a swim because you're hot, you're sweaty, you've been hiking all day, and you look down, and from beneath you comes this massive moose in all of its glory, just shammooing out of the water. You cannot convince me that God doesn't have a sense of humor, right?
Michael, check this out. I'm gonna give him big fuck off antlers and little legs. It's gonna be great.
Exactly.
And make them really tall so they're right where the branches are.
Oh my god, it's like the platypus. If another thing, if you don't know, has a barb on its leg.
Yep.
And it is poisoned.
Yep.
Right? Or envenomed.
Yeah, it's a venomous
And
animal.
apparently, this venom is one of the most excruciating pains that a human being can experience without it killing you. Why? Why?
Because
Why
God said,
fuck
around and find
makes
out.
sense. A spider has that, makes sense. Like these huge predators, they have that, makes sense. It's a fucking platypus. It's, if not friend, why friend shaped?
I'm gonna give it a duck bill. I mean, the argument
it's gonna
for
be
beer,
a mammal, but it's gonna lay eggs just to fuck with them.
Right.
Also, so another fun fact about platypi, so they have one of the earliest developments of, so as mammals, they produce milk. They don't have nipples. Almost all other mammals have nipples. But
fuck?
Wait,
listen,
where do they produce milk?
So milk glands, evolutionarily speaking, developed out of sweat glands. Milk is just specialized sweat. Milk glands, mammary glands are specialized sweat glands. Platypi sweat out milk instead of producing it from nipples. Yeah.
God works in mysterious ways. This one's most mysterious of all.
By the way, I love moose. I keep them around.
Perfect.
I did not ask anyone to get this for me. This was just what I keep on my desk. Hallelujah. So platypi sweat milk because milk is just sweat, but better.
Yeah. Now
it's nutritious sweat
from specific areas that are like mammary areas, and it's not like their whole body sweats milk or anything like that.
No, right? But that's really
that's only slightly better. Hallelujah. But yes, getting back to the point that led us here, you have to have a sense of humor. Yes. With faith. What I tell people, people will ask me, my parishioners will ask me, what is the most important like attribute, like emotional quality to have when experiencing faith? I tell them the same answer every time: playfulness. You gotta be playful. Because nobody can be mad and playful, right? And so when I come to you and I say, hey, you come from a different faith tradition, you come from a different cultural tradition, I could get angry at that. I could grieve that. I think those are weird responses, but it could happen. But I could be playful and say, oh, that's interesting. Let me know more. Oh, that's fascinating. What led you to this belief? I don't have to agree with you. I'm authentic. I'm gonna agree with. I'm gonna believe what I do, but I'm gonna be curious and I'm gonna be playful. And humor is a part of playfulness. So I want to go up to God and say, why? Why the platypus? Why the moose? And the same token, why evil? Why hurricanes? Why give us the ability to split the atom to create a bomb? Right? Why? And we do this in a way that's playful because it is a child talking to a parent. It is an ant talking to a black hole, right? And the only way we can bridge that lack of ability to understand is the same way my 5-year-old does. We play.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful and it's wonderful.
Yeah. All right, it is a little after 9. Let's hit some closing thoughts before we wrap up for the night.
One of which is, what have you been drinking the whole night? Because I'm curious now.
So I have 2 beverages. The first, I love microbrews, right? I'm a bit of a beer snob. I do not drink mass-produced beers if I can help it. I'm trying right now. I live in Michigan again. I grew up in Michigan, lived away from Michigan for 10 years, and I'm back. I'm sampling as many different Michigan beers as I can. So the first is from Rochester Mills Brewing Company, which I love. Their amber, the Rochester Mills amber, is probably my number 1 beer, period. But this is not that. This is a toasted marshmallow milkshake stout.
Okay.
From Rochester Mills. So that's one. And the other one I've been switching to is Rainmaker Ale, which is from Stormcloud Brewing Company. And I got to read, I know it's in Michigan, and this is a Belgian styled ale.
Oh, nice.
Frankfurt. This is in Frankfurt.
Okay.
This one is a very nice, just relax. It's a beer. It's not asking too much of you. It's not putting you to sleep. It's not filling your stomach. It's a nice, casual beer. And then the stout is pretty stouty. It's a milkshake stout, so it's a little on the sweeter side, but still got the robustness. I appreciate both of them.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm pounding back a Midwest Nice, which is Michigan hard cider.
Nice.
Wonderful.
Yes. And it comes out of, because Maleck has had this effect on me, Hudsonville, Michigan.
Hudsonville. Wonderful.
Yeah. You have so increased, like, I have to really hand it to you, my friend. You have really increased my palate. Hey, Maleck, it's smooth.
I will come through this computer and strangle you. The thing where you have with the J Christmas.
Oh, the candy cane.
Yeah, candy canes. Is Sarenth was smooth, I swear to God.
So for a long time, I did not have any way of quantifying what I was tasting. So everything was smooth, even like really shit liquor.
I had watched Sarenth take a shot, start coughing because it was burning so badly, and say in a growling voice because he can't speak straight yet because it's burning his throat, "It's smooth." God, it's smooth.
That ain't smooth.
That's not what that means.
Well, to be fair, that's like me and Hoppy. I drink a lot of IPAs, and so I will drink an ale. Oh, I enjoy them. It's an acquired taste.
It is.
And I'll drink something that's hoppy, but on the mild side, but my palate is so hoppy. I'm like, I will tell my friends or I'll tell my spouse, it's not that bad. It's not that hoppy. And they'll take it and they're like, oh, it's so bitter. I'm like, it's not that bad. It's enjoyable. I enjoy this. Why do you enjoy this?
My problem is if I feel like I may as well be eating grass, I have a problem with the IPA. And maybe that's just the IPAs I've run into.
It is, but it's also not. That's a whole.
Yes, but a good IPA, there are earthy IPAs, sure. But you can get some that are really flavorful. Like you can really start tasting either the barley, or if they have fruit in them. I do like fruity IPAs. There's a really good blueberry IPA. I'm not going to recall the name right now, but it's like a 10.5 or 11. So and it's so sweet because of the blueberry that you don't taste how thick it is.
Ooh.
It'll knock you on your ass quick. There's another one out of Warren, Michigan, the Final Absolution, which is a banana and clove beer, and that's another one. It's like 10 plus, and
Banana
be
and clove
careful.
sounds wild.
It is very good.
So banana and cloves are the main flavor profiles in most German Hefeweizen and other.
Really? Oh, then I'd love it.
And it actually comes not from fruit or spice, because by German law you can't include those. We're going on a wild tangent as I asked for by German law you cannot include those in beer. It's purely ester profiles that come from the yeast.
Oh, interesting.
They use specific yeast. Yeah. And the yeast produce those flavors as byproducts along with the alcohol during fermentation, which is also what gives Belgian ales their particular flavor profile. Is the yeast cultivated by Belgian monks in their monasteries, ales and such. It's the monasteries.
God bless the Trappists.
Yep. Yeah. No, legitimately though. Yeah.
Really quick.
Yes.
Before we get off on another tangent, because you need to go to bed and we need to do the after party. and we've gotten our first hyper evangelical in the comments, which was that was fun. That was fun.
I missed it.
It's fine. He started at first. It was like, "What are you saying? Oh, you're being crazy." Okay,
and anti-Muslim. Neat. Go fuck yourself.
Oh wow, yeah.
The last comment was, "We're gonna be eating children at some point." So yeah, that was nice.
Yes, yes. All of us should get ready and get your bibs together for the after party adrenochrome sacred meal.
Well, I'll be the first to say, The Simpsons did it best when they said, "Oh wow, that religion's stupid. Let's go home and worship our cannibalistic carpenter from the Middle East."
Right?
I mean, technically not wrong.
Nope, technically not wrong.
There's a lot of nuance you're missing there, but more or less.
Oh God. I really appreciate all the time you've spent with us today. This has been fabulous. I want to have you back on.
Anytime. I enjoy this deeply.
Yeah.
I also, for our listeners, I just really want to appreciate how you folks have showed up in the comments. I really appreciate everybody that's shown up tonight.
Absolutely.
When we see you in the after party, please remember to drink water, take care of yourself. If you need to eat, please eat. And everybody who has showed up, thank you so much. Maleck, this has been a fabulous talk. And Kevin, this has been amazing.
It's good to meet you, Sarenth.
I was expecting good things because, like, to be perfectly blunt, you were talked up during the last ritual I was at, and everybody was really excited for this. So I was like, cool, I'm looking forward to this, but I didn't realize how much fun I'd have. So I really appreciate you bringing your A game and just being yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's good.
It's the only person I'm good at being, so I stick to it.
Right. And I really appreciate that we can come together. Like, we don't agree on a lot of things. Like, there are things in our faith that are mutually exclusive, right?
Sure. Monotheism is pretty exclusive, and polytheism is pretty, I don't know what you call it. It's not exclusive, but it's very encompassing.
Yeah. Hardcore the other way. But, like, at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to be better humans for each other, and that's how we go about that. Like, we won't agree on things, and that's fine. We won't experience divinity the same way. Of course not. We're different people.
If we experience divinity the same way, either I'm probably doing heathenry wrong, or you're probably doing Christianity wrong.
Right, really. But we're still experiencing the divine, and we can still talk about it together, even though we don't agree. And that's fine.
Because we're human, and we can agree that what humans need is food
Yep.
and love and a sense of something that's beyond ourselves. And
Yeah.
I find that in Jesus, in that faith, and you find it within heathenry and your faith. And we don't have to agree on that, but we can love each other. And we can love the
Absolutely.
people around us, even the upstart atheist scientist.
Yep.
Absolutely. So with that, I want to
All
thank
right, well.
everybody for joining us, and we will see as many of you folks as we can in the after party. Maleck, will you please send Kevin an invite for our
Yes,
Discord?
will do.
Yeah,
And,
please.
I want to thank everybody who's shown up. Again, please hydrate. Please take care of yourselves. Please be good to one another. And go in peace, and blessings to you.
Indeed.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.